Ustedes saben, bueno, pues el día de hoy realmente it is for me a real pleasure and an honor to have with us Sherife AbdelMessih. He is really, I'm going to read his bio, but I really want to say that he is not only a passionate promoter of renewable energies, but he's a real entrepreneur, he's a leader at the world level, really pushing for this transformation that needs to happen in the world and of course in Mexico. As you know, we have a very provocative title. Renewable energy, is Mexico ready for the next big disruption? And I think that you will see in Sherife's presentation that he really has a case for renewable energies for Mexico, and it is really my real pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Sherife to this audience. Sherife is the CEO of Future Energy Corporation, the leading company serving the renewable energy industry in the Middle East and North Africa. Initially, Sherife built this corporation as a research and development startup designing disruptive solar energy technologies catered for the Middle East and the North Africa region. And then he grew it into a renewable energy company with project development, consulting, and R&D divisions. He further grew the company's business outside this region into Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Through a European holding company, majority owned by Future Energy Corporation, Sherife pioneered the business model for developing solar power projects with attractive financial returns without the need of any government incentives or subsidies. I think this is quite remarkable. He was also a consultant on the development of the first solar power plant in the Middle East and an advisor to multiple self-made billionaires on power and renewable energy investments. Sherife, as I mentioned, is a passionate entrepreneur and played a pivotal role in stimulating the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Egypt through founding Spark Ventures in 2007. His work has created a talent pipeline of high school students, college students, and full-time entrepreneurs, empowering entrepreneurs across all age groups. In 2010, he was selected by Yahoo as one of the top 10 social entrepreneurs in Egypt and the youngest on the list. In 2012, he was profiled by Arabian Business Magazine on their list of the 500 most influential people in the Middle East. Sherife is regularly invited to speak at industry events hosted by institutions such as the Financial Times, Bloomberg, the World Bank, and Harvard Business School. He holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from MIT, so he's surrounded by colleagues that are sharing a very similar discipline, where he was endowed with the Onsi full scholarship in addition to other prestigious awards and fellowships for his scientific and leadership work on the campus. He founded the MIT Egyptian Student Association in 2006 and is currently the chairman of the MIT Alumni Club in Egypt. He's a citizen of Egypt and speaks fluent English, French, and Arabic, and hopefully soon Spanish too, so that he can address this group in Spanish. It is my great pleasure, Sherife, to welcome you to TEC de Monterrey and Instituto Global para la Sostenibilidad.
Thank you very much, Isabel.
Thank you. Thank you. The floor is all yours.
See, the problem with having such a generous introduction is she builds your expectations so high it can only go downhill from here. But it is, I have to say, it is a pleasure to be here at this wonderful campus and to be in Mexico in general. My first time in Mexico was in January of this year, and this would be my third time in Mexico. So if I came 3 times in 1 year, you must be doing something right as a country. And I think you know, there's a lot in common between Egyptian and Mexican culture, more than just that the fact that both our ancestors were fond of building pyramids, and more than the fact that we both have horrible traffic situations that you feel right at home if you visit Egypt. You wouldn't feel like you left Mexico at all. Let's go back to So, you know, as the topic is mentioned for the lecture, you know, I'm going to be talking about the global renewable energy industry. Where is the industry going? Where has it been? Where is Mexico relative to that? And where can Mexico go? And can Mexico, you know, with this global disruption? And what has happened in the industry in the last 5 years is nothing you know, short of phenomenal. It is really, really amazing, and it is a pity that this level of advancement hasn't trickled down in terms of awareness to reach you know, the global population. And you really have to be working in this space to be aware of how much level of development has happened in renewable energy. And this is some of the information that I hope to pass to you through this lecture. But just to get an idea of you know, of some color on the audience, you know, how many people here are very familiar with the renewable energy industries and they read the news regularly? You could raise your hand. Okay, so I'm gonna have some very hard questions today. We have a lot of people who are aware. So maybe from one of the people that, you know, that raised their hands, or any other volunteers that would like, how much money do you think was spent in renewable energy last year? Like investments that were made in renewable energy last year. Anybody could guess. Like, we're not going to penalize anyone for giving the wrong answer, but you might win a prize if you say the right answer. So.
I don't have a number, but it was a record year for renewables here in Mexico. I mean, it was a very large number as compared to previous years.
So I'm still looking for a guess for a number. 1 million, 10 million, 100 million. Come on. Come on. Okay, I'll close my eyes. I won't see who said it. 100 million. You have 100 million. So the actual number is $312 billion were invested in renewable energy last year. Billion with a B. That's 9 zeros. That's a lot of money. 312 billion. You can see from here, I'll try to get out of your way. You can see from here how this money was split up in terms of what type of investments. So venture capital on the left, corporate R&D, you know, asset finance, different types of investments that lead up to $312 billion that were invested last year. Every single dollar that went into this went to displace natural gas, coal, or oil, went to save electricity, went to save, you know, carbon emissions. So this is not a small industry, something for green environmental people who love hugging trees. This is a serious business that is, you know, growing every year and will continue to grow. I expect this 312 billion will be $1 trillion within 10 years. So we're talking about something that is very large. Here you can see the annual investments that have been made over the years. The reason that 213 number is 254, not 312, is because the 254 is that number that you see over here, which does not include mergers and acquisitions and those other types of investments. So a little bit of explanation. From 2004, you can see the investments, annual investments were only 55 billion, going up to 254 in that type of investment. And the reason it peaked at 2011 and fell after is because in 2011, around roughly 80% of the renewable energy or solar energy projects and most renewable energy projects happening in the world were happening in Europe. And they were mostly, a lot of them coming from government support. When the debt crisis happened, the money dried down, and so the next year, Europe fell off the map, and Europe today is responsible for maybe 20% instead of 80%. And in 2013, it continued to go down because you have the cost of the technology fell so much that for the same amount of projects, it ended up costing less. Now this is the same previous slide, but showing you the data by quarter instead of by year. Now you can see here the distribution by what type of technology. So the yellow is solar, the blue is wind, and you can see that by far the majority of the money is going to solar technology. And I say that because in Mexico, a lot of people, or some people are saying, we don't need solar, we're doing enough wind projects, that's enough for renewables. And that's not true. You can put a solar panel on a house, you can put it in a hospital, in a supermarket, whereas with wind you need very particular conditions, and it's a different ballgame. So wind is necessary, solar is necessary, all types of renewables are necessary. It's a mix for you to have a healthy portfolio of energy. Now here it's showing you where this money came from, these types of investments. So the big purple bar, the one on the bottom, that's asset finance. So that's money coming from banks. Whereas you can see the other colors are playing a minor role, especially venture capital is the smallest contributor. That light purple is venture capital. And what I'm highlighting here is when you have an investment that's most of it is coming from venture capital money, this is something that is very risky, that people are taking a big bet on, that is maybe in 10 years it's going to start working, or in 5 years it's going to start working. So we can see that venture capital money is a tiny, tiny fraction of the money that's been going to renewable energy. And on the other hand, the biggest contributor is asset finances, commercial banks, which are the most risk-averse financial entities in the world. These are people that don't just hate risk, they hate anything that starts with R or rhymes with risk, right? So the fact that they're putting the majority of the over $300 billion that I mentioned means that to them, they have no doubts whatsoever that this will not work or will not perform as projected. So we're talking about so far a proven technology, whether it's wind or solar, with long lifetime, that's hundreds of billions of dollars of investments, and that is very mature. Now here is a geographic distribution of where this money that we just showed you before is going. So you're seeing that somehow the two continents with the most sun in the world are the two continents with the least investments, Africa and Latin America. And it's an interesting observation. We can make many hypotheses for this, but I think what it has to do is you have the governments in these on these continents are not as long-term thinking as Europe or as North America, or maybe even China, because that's we're having an earlier conversation with Isabel today about the government really favoring natural gas and petroleum in Mexico here, and you have the situation is that they like the status quo. They don't want to rock the boat. Natural gas is doing very well for the country. Petroleum is doing very well for the country. It's very hard to talk about creating a new industry in Mexico, a renewable energy industry, and highlighting the benefits and all of that. So it takes time. These continents seem to be a little bit averse to change, and so it's just a matter of time that they will catch up. But again, the question here is, do you want to be a leader at the forefront where you're reaping the benefits, or you want to be in the back where you're just an adopter, you're coming at the late stage, and someone else is taking the lion's share of the benefit and you're only taking a fraction as a consumer? Over here we're seeing capacity additions basically in Europe by the year, the total amount of power generation that has been added each year, what type of technology was used. And you can see, for instance, here that by far solar and wind in Europe were responsible for the majority of additional power plants built, while natural gas and other were minorities. So these are all signs that wait a minute, we must be missing something here. You know, if all these investments are going in all these democratically elected, largest economies in the world, you know, we have, you know, the 4 largest economies, China, Japan, US and Germany, they are the 4 leaders in renewable energy. And they wouldn't spend that much money on it if, you know, it was a maybe, or as some people are not convinced. Here you're seeing annual investments in fossil fuels for power generation compared to annual investments in clean energy. And you can see that, you know, renewable energy is not just noise in the background. Again, this is very, very, very close. So the question is, you know, whose interest is it to keep this information from the public that has been fed with information that renewables don't work, you know, it's expensive, so I think really we need a mass awareness campaign for people to really know, you know, where the industry is, what the technology can do for them, how much money it can save them, because when you have the public support, then you can convince the government with new policies that support these industries. Now, this is a slide also to give you an idea of the size of the renewable energy industry compared to other industries. I thought we would have a lot more students here, so that's why I have the slides. But you know, global commercial aerospace, that's basically the money that's going into every single airplane that has been sold. So when you know, American Airlines buys a new Boeing 777 or something, that's recorded in it. Every single investment is recorded in that. So you can see that it's larger than the music industry, larger than the drug industry, the global luxury good industry, commercial aerospace industry. We are talking about something major here. Now, this is a slide that is showing us the returns or of the New Energy Exchange, which is basically an exchange that tracks the top 100 performing renewable energy stocks, comparing it to the Nasdaq, comparing it to the S&P since January to the day. You can see that if you had invested in that, the return in it relative to Nasdaq, relative to S&P. Now, disclaimer, I'm not saying you should go invest in that. This is just between January to today. I don't know what will happen in 3 months, and you know, so don't come and lose your bet. Sell your house and say if you lose your money, that go to Isabel and tell her this guy you brought from Egypt, you know, he gave us some really bad advice. So I'm not saying that. Now, this is a cost curve that is showing you, you know, the cost of wind turbines historically, and you can see, you know, what the cost was in 1984, what it was in 2012, and the trajectory that's going today. You know, 29% cost reduction since 2008. We're talking about a technology that is decreasing in cost year on year and will continue to decrease in costs. If we look at solar, you have the same thing. In 1978, you know, the price was, you know, close to $100 per watt. Today, it's under $1 per watt. And in the last 5 years alone, you've had a cost reduction of 80%. And to give you an idea of how dynamic the solar market, we have some space in the front if you'd like to come in, please. Flyers. And I was asking him for a specific price for a project that we're doing with him. And his answer was, that's impossible. You know, anyone that's in business that deals with clients directly knows that you would never tell a client impossible. Unless it is really impossible, because then, you know, you really can't do anything. Just a couple of weeks before I come here, I had the same call with the same guy at the same company. And I asked for the same price. And his answer was to quote, absolutely. So the solar industry is one of the very few industries in the world where you can go from impossible to absolutely in 12 months. And that is just an indication of how dynamic and how fast the industry is moving. And when we talk about this convincing governments to do such projects, they need to be on the same pace of this industry. When we talk about projects and investments in this space, they shouldn't just look at where it is today, but where it's going to be 5 years from now, where it is going to be 10 years from now, because we've seen just in 1 year, or from my experience, and in just 5 years from the data that I've showed you, and historical data going back decades, how fast the cost curve has fallen. So on one case we have fossil fuels, where whether it's coal or natural gas or oil, you have the price has historically been increasing. If I would show the same curve for oil or for natural gas, or you would see it going up. Yes, there are some fluctuations year on year, up and down, but it is going up, and it's continued forecasted to go up for simple reasons of supply and demand and inflation, resource scarcity, all of that. Whereas with renewables and with solar specifically, you're dealing with technology here, and with you can remember your first mobile phone that you bought. And if it happened to be the Nokia Banana in the 90s that had 3 ringtones, and you could save 20 names on it, right? And you had to attach an extra battery on it so that it doesn't die on you by the time you finished lunch. And how much did that cost, right? Whereas with today, what is the cost with phones and what can you do with them? So your iPhone or your Samsung, that has more than 60 times the processing power than the Apollo spaceship that went to the moon. Can you imagine that? Just in your palm, everyone has access to this. This is how fast technology is developing, and this is how fast cost cutting is happening. So when you talk about the renewable energy industry, this is the lens that we have to look at it from. That this is something that year on year will continue going down on price. And so, within the next, decade or two, we can see 3 cents per kilowatt hour PPAs, prices of electricity coming from solar and coming from wind. I don't think this is something that we'll ever see with coal or natural, or even hydro, which is the cheapest known source of electricity. Now, when it comes to jobs, this is the government's favorite word. They want to create jobs, right? This is showing you the amount of jobs created in the US in solar, which is in the lime green, versus coal in purple. So you can see not only is it higher, but one's much increasing at a faster rate every year. The other ones is at a much less rate, maybe even decreasing in the last few years. And to put this in context, the coal industry represents almost 50% of the fuel mix in the US. So 50% of the electricity almost that's generated in the US is coming from coal. Whereas solar represents less than 1%. So with less than 1%, you're already creating much more jobs than something that has almost 50%. So that's, again, to put in perspective the amount of benefits that we're not just talking about building a power plant, we're talking about building an industry, building an economy, GDP growth, job creation, lifting from poor to middle class. This is something that can have transformational impact on countries. And we will come to that on the next few slides. You're seeing here Central America in the middle, with Colombia at the bottom and Mexico on the top. There is a transmission grid called CPAC that has been recently built between Central American countries. And there is also a connection to Mexico. So when we're talking about building solar power plants or wind power plants and building a renewable energy industry in Mexico, we're not just talking about generating electricity for local consumption in Mexico. We're not just talking about saving electricity from other resources such as fossil fuels. We're talking about building one of Mexico's next largest export products, exporting electricity to Central America and to North America. And this is not a new idea. In other regions, this stuff is happening. You can see that on the North American side. An orange, that's not sand. These are the transmission grids between, on both countries. Now, another area in the world, closer to where I'm from, this is what's happening. This is what people are planning in the next 20 years. that's Egypt over here, where I'm from. Come visit. This is North Africa, this is Europe. And you can see basically the plan is to build solar power plants and wind power plants in North Africa and build transmission grid, submarine cables under the sea that can transport this electricity to Europe. So we're talking about value beyond just the local economy. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value today, and that's just in building power plants, selling electricity locally and regionally. I didn't talk about manufacturing, I didn't talk about inventing the technology. I'm talking about very basic things that the risk is well known and is controllable, and the project we know how to manage that, and it can be done. So there are no gaps in my argument so far. Now we focus a little bit on Mexico. On the left, you're seeing where the fuel mix is coming from. So how you generate electricity in Mexico. Each electricity that you're consuming at your house, this is where it's coming from. The majority of it is coming from natural gas by far, over 50%, as you can see. And then the second largest is oil and diesel, large hydro, coal, nuclear, and renewables, and most of that renewables is wind. Now, over here, you're seeing a closer breakdown of who owns what out of this capacity. And you can see here that 13 gigawatts, so the total grid is around 65 gigawatts for Mexico. And you can see here that 13 gigawatts which is this part over here, is oil and diesel. Now, oil and diesel are the most expensive type of fossil fuels. Oil is at over $100 a barrel. But we have a lot of it in Mexico. So it's cheap. We just dig the ground and, we get oil and we burn it and it's free, right? So we should use a lot of it. That's an argument that people have been making for many years. However, anyone who studied economics here would say the more basic principle that you learn in Economics 101 when you're in college is opportunity cost. So if I have something that I have access to that is very cheap over here and I'm using it, but Alejandro over there is paying, to me it's costing me $1 to extract, but Alejandro over there it costs him $100. So should I be using it myself or sell it to him for $100 and use that money to do other things with it? And this is the argument that really justifies the phasing out of not closing down the oil wells. No, okay, if you bring out the oil if you want, but how do you use it? How do you manage that resource? What's the most efficient way? Is it to burn it at the power plants locally and sell it for cheap, or to export it at the high market prices globally and use that money to build more hospitals, build more schools, build more power plants, and do some renewable projects with it? And instead of that, the displacement that would out of those plants that you're going to retire, you can use solar and wind plants that are going to be decreasing in cost every year. Now here you're seeing on the left the consumption of the total electricity consumption in Mexico split by what type of consumer it is. So you can see that the largest consumers are by far the industries and the purpose, then the residential, then the commercial, agriculture, and services. And then on the other slide, you're seeing how much everyone is paying. So you're seeing agriculture almost getting free electricity, and then residential is also getting very cheap, close to 7 or 8 cents. Now, if you take it from the other side, the people that are paying the most are the DAC residential, which is a type of residential that consumes a lot of electricity. It changes by geography, but it's maybe over like 200 kilowatt hours per month in some regions. So from here we see that the commercial and the DAC residential, these two combined represent around 11% of the market. 2% for the DAC residential and 9% for the commercial. And these should be the target for solar power projects today, without even waiting for the government. Why? Because they're paying a price that's high enough that is already much more than what it would cost if you were to get a solar system and put it on your roof, or put it on your pharmacy, or put it on your supermarket. Now here you're seeing a slide that is showing you the different types of renewable projects that have been invested in Mexico. So you can see that by far most of the investments have been made in wind, in the blue, and then solar and geothermal are next. And so $1.3 billion in 2012 went to investments in wind energy, 318 million went to solar. So 318 million went to solar compared to the 150 billion that went to solar globally. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the global market. And here you're seeing the amount of expected. So 57 megawatts is what's been built in Mexico for solar power plants last year. 57 megawatts. The global built up last year for solar alone was 38 gigawatts, so 38,000 megawatts around the world, 57 megawatts in Mexico. And these are the forecasted. So you can still see that by 2016, Mexico is still forecasted to be doing very little solar, and that's factoring in the legislation that has just been passed today. So from what we've seen so far, we've established that renewable energy is an extremely large industry that has grown very quickly because of the immense value that is provided in different countries that have utilized it. It is a technology that has been slashed in cost dramatically and is expected to continue to, and does so every year. It is an industry that creates a lot of jobs, more than all of its peers. And it is something that is very bankable, that is invested and participated by the most risk-averse entities, financial entities in the world. Now, we have been mostly talking about power generation. If I were to shift and talk about transportation, that is something that you're going to see, maybe most of you probably are hearing about this huge development that happened over the last 10 years from me, or from maybe you've read about in other areas, but you haven't really lived it. Now, this other disruption, the transportation disruption, is something that you're going to be lived. And this is something I'm talking about when referring to electric vehicles. Now, electric vehicles are simply cars that run on electricity. You have batteries in them instead of a tank that you put gasoline on, and you charge them from the grid, and that they run on electricity. Now, the technology has developed today where you can have electric vehicles that go on one charge. You charge them at night, and then you can go for 400 kilometers on one single charge of them. Now, I'm not aware of a lot of people that drive 400 kilometers every day, so that's pretty much beyond the average need of 99% of humans. And so this is something that has developed a lot. Now, the interesting part is the cost of it is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of gasoline. So let's say it costs you $4 per gallon to put gasoline in Mexico. I'm just making guess. The equivalent cost would be 40 cents per gallon, the equivalent of it. So it's a tiny fraction. Okay. Now we are just seeing, we've reached a point where all the big car manufacturers, BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, are starting to develop electric vehicles after they've seen that companies that are purely producing electric vehicles, how much they've succeeded, how much their stock has went up. They've now been convinced that this is a segment of technology that is going to take a lot of market share from us. So we better have a product like that for consumers that like those cars and want to get them. So when you get an electric vehicle and you have a solar system on your roof, what are you doing? You're energy independent. You're producing your own electricity on your roof for your house, and you have your car that you're charging it from your solar panels. Now, another thing that's going to happen is, as a result of the development of the electric vehicle industry, something is going to happen to batteries and the energy storage industry. So over the next 10 years, or less precisely, I think 8 years, you're going to have a slash in energy storage costs by 40%. That's predominantly coming from all the energy storage companies that are building new factories to supply to meet the demand of these electric vehicles. So just like the same cost curve that I showed you for solar and wind, you're going to see a similar cost curve for lithium-ion batteries, that are going to be used to store energy. So when we have energy storage at cheap and economic prices, what does that mean? That means that you're not going to only be using solar when the sun is shining. You're not going to only be using wind when it's blowing. You're going to be using it all day round. So you have a big solar power plant. Half of it's producing during the morning. The other half is storing into batteries so that you can use that electricity at night, and so forth for wind. So, with these trajectories as they happen, we can talk about a global energy mix or local energy mix for Mexico that is majority renewables coming from solar and wind and energy storage technologies. Transportation will be electric, and transportation in general globally will be electric for planes, for boats. Everything in transportation, with the exception of rockets, basically, is going within our lifetime is going to be electric. And now when we come back to Mexico and we think, okay, where is Mexico? From all of that. Well, what does Mexico have? It has been blessed with huge amount of sunlight, excellent wind speeds, excellent geographic location that enables it to capitalize on more expensive markets such as Central America, which have higher electricity costs. So it really has all the elements it needs in order to capitalize on this and build a new industry. Moreover, the hard part has already been done by other people. How did this happen? This is companies investing billions of dollars in R&D, governments putting billions of dollars in investments, building larger factories that has been going on for decades by other people, by Chinese, by Europeans, by Americans. Well, we can say thank you for doing all the hard work. Now, we're going to take this beautiful gift that you financed and we're going to use it for our own benefit. So the hard work has been done by other people. What's left is just to get moving with this, to get this train moving. Now, with that, I'll touch on one last point, which is the concept called solar leasing that you might have heard about. It's very popular, particularly in the US, and has been getting a lot of media attention. Now, this model I see very applicable in Mexico today without any government involvement needed for these two segments that I mentioned, which have the highest electricity prices, DAC and the commercial. And I'm simply choosing them because they have the highest electricity prices. So they are the most economic to do. So what does the solar lease involve? The solar lease is basically a concept where if you are a household or you are a commercial owner, a company would come to you and would put up a solar system on your roof for free. You wouldn't pay anything for it. Okay? No, it doesn't stop there. There's something that comes after. So because I saw a lot of people smiling when I said we put it for free. I was like, wait a minute. So this is your old electric bill. Now, when they put a solar system on your roof, what happens? Your consumption goes down, so your new electric bill becomes smaller. But there's nothing free in this world. So in return, you have to make a payment, which is called a lease payment. So a monthly payment, which is this one. When you add the two together, you find that every month, you're still saving a significant amount on your electricity bill without having done anything. You didn't change your behavior, you didn't invest any money. This company made an agreement with you that you're going to make a monthly lease payment of X. In return of that, they're going to put up a system that reduces your consumption, and as a result, this is what happens. So at the end of the day, this is what it looks like. These end up being your savings. And so this is a way where consumers can adopt solar technology without having to put up their own capital, and it's also a way where they can also reduce their electricity bills immediately. Now, the solar leasing opportunity in Mexico today for around 6.5 gigawatts. That is a very big market. That is not a small opportunity. So this is something that I think can be done immediately, while in parallel, industry and the private sector lobbies the government and makes the case of all these fundamentals points that we discussed today in order to provide incentives and have a strategy and an agenda to put Mexico on the renewable energy map, not only regionally, but hopefully globally too. This is something that, my company does in different regions, and we're considering this. We're currently studying its applicability in Mexico. And with that, I'm going to end, and I will take any questions that you have.
Or comments. Or comments. Okay.
My name's Emily. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg DNA. And my question is, I had talked to a U.S. solar company, just generally speaking about investing in Mexico, and he said that if electricity is subsidized, it would be a particularly interesting market for them to enter. And I was wondering what it would not.
He said it would not?
So just generally speaking, I'm not saying that that would be everybody's opinion, but just generally speaking, how do you see the electricity prices and the future of electricity prices as motivating solar investment or solar companies to invest in the Mexican market?
Well, there are two reasons that you'd invest in a market. Either because electricity prices are high, or there is a government incentive that compensates for electricity prices being low. And what I basically did is I've showed you different electricity prices in Mexico. What I've said is these prices are too low for anything to be able to happen at, and for something to happen without any government incentives, it would have to happen at that level. Unless the government steps in and says, we're going to provide incentive if you do projects for this, because the government is losing money on these projects. There's no, look, in January it was selling at like 1 cent. Like, there's no electricity in the world that costs 1 cent to generate, transmit, and distribute. It doesn't exist. And if it does, tell me, so I'll take some of it back to Egypt. So the government is losing money on this. So they have two cases: either override the government, just do pure private sector play and focus on these segments, or you talk to the government and you say, whatever money you're paying here, whatever money you're losing here, you should provide an incentive for people that are in these segments and are using renewable technologies.
How does this...
Luis Manuel, preséntate.
Sí, soy Luis Manuel Guerra de INAINE y miembro fundador del IGS. How does this equation behaves in front of the saturated capacity that the present grid already has? We know, for example, that there is no extra capacity for building more wind farms in the southeast, because there is no capacity to transport the electricity. How does it behave in this equation?
Well, the beautiful thing about solar technology is it's very modular and it applies to distributed generation, which is a perfect candidate for situations in what you're saying. So it would be hard if we're talking about building 1 gigawatt of solar in the middle of the desert, and then building, a transmission line to connect it to the grid. And so the grid, what you're saying is, doesn't have the capacity to absorb that 1 gigawatt. But if we take that 1 gigawatt and we divide it across 10,000 houses, okay? Then each house or each commercial entity or each factory is using that to offset its consumption. So it's taking 30% of its consumption from the solar system, and the 70% it's taking from the grid. So it's reducing the strain on the grid in one way. So in that case, you would focus on distributed generation.
My name is Laura Mendez. I work for a second-tier bank in Mexico for the rural sector. I would like to ask you, is this solar leasing works for the rural sector or the agro industry?
Or for the agro?
Industry.
Well, for the agro, it wouldn't. Well, simply because the price they're paying is too low. So the issue here is that the agriculture industry is being sold electricity at a price that is lower than what it really costs. So the government is losing money on electricity that is selling to the agriculture industry. So if someone is losing money on something, nobody can compete with him. You'd have to lose money like him in order to compete. So to provide that same service, to the agriculture industry, you'd have to lose money, which is not usually what the private sector is in for. So that's for the agriculture industry. But for remote villages and things like that, it would work if they are paying high electricity prices. So there are a lot of remote villages that are not connected to the grid, where it's much cheaper to do that model as opposed to building new transmission lines to connect them to the grid. It would be much more expensive to do that. In all cases, the solar leasing model can apply to any situation, with the exception that if you're in a situation like that, then you need the same government that is creating the inefficiency in the market to correct that efficiency. Either by first option, which I'm not basically saying they should do, raising the price and keeping it at the real price and not like subsidizing it, or the same subsidy that they're giving to give that to the entity that's providing the solar lease. And what does that do? To the cost of the government is exactly the same. It does not increase the cost because that entity stopped consuming electricity from the government and it's consuming solar electricity. So it keeps the subsidy budget exactly the same. However, it frees up oil and natural gas resources that can be then exported at a higher price globally. Thank you. You're welcome. No, you came late. You can't ask questions.
Hello, my name is Alex. I'm a student here. Very nice conference. Thank you very much. Wouldn't it be a bit risky? I don't know if I understood the solar leasing correctly, but you're saying that for people that are on the DAC tariff, that have high consumption of energy, but still residential. So wouldn't it be a bit risky to implement solar leasing on DAC, because at some point the Commission of Electricity, if you reduce your consumption, you step out of the DAC price, which is like 3-something pesos per kilowatt. So it goes way down into the residential price again. So wouldn't that be a bit risky as coming in as an external company and saying, okay, you keep paying whatever you pay, but now you're on solar. But what happens if the customer somehow reduces his consumption and jumps back to the normal tariff?
You should come work with us. That's an interesting question. So basically what happens is it's a regular insurance that you have is when you're engineering the system, you're engineering so that you can cut off the power remotely. So if that they stop paying, you cut off the power and they start paying higher electricity. So that's what would happen if they decide to do that. So the minute they stop paying you, they're saying, oh, I'm smart now, thank you for getting me to this, I don't owe you anything, go and sue me in the courts, which is going to take 10 years to give you a ruling. You say, okay, you press the button, there's no solar electricity coming from them, and within 1 month they realize and they start paying back. But that's really the emergency kind of solution that you use. You should be generally not giving this lease to any clients that don't have a good credit rating, that we're not going to honor their commitments and the contracts they signed.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm an ex-student, an alumni. I'm curious to know what the big oil companies like Shell or Mobil here in Mexico, Pemex, how have they reacted to this huge demand for the renewable energy? Have they seen it as a threat, or have they gone into investing some of their technologies or resources into developing more sustainable energy? Because originally it's been seen as a threat, but I think it's also an opportunity. So I don't know what have been their reactions to renewable.
Most of them are too arrogant to realize it's a threat. They still think that, oh, this is nothing, there's no way this could do that. Most of them. And so still there's, it's been business as usual. Very few maybe have set up like venture capital funds to invest in clean technologies. I think some of it might be just to have a good green image or show that, they're doing some green stuff. But that also goes for most utilities. not just most oil and gas companies. So most utilities that sell power have been fighting it. First the saying, I think it was Gandhi that says, maybe someone can say it better than me probably, but something to the extent of first they ignore you, then they make fun of you, then they fight you, then you win. That's exactly what's been happening in the renewable energy industry from the utilities. So first they're saying, what is this? Then they ignored you, then they make fun of you. Then now they're fighting it. So the utilities are fighting it. So they're putting all these restrictions now. So saying, oh, a house, you can't put solar more than 10 kilowatts on your house. Why? Because it's gonna do this to the grid and all this BS that technically is not true when you actually go into the details of it. So they say like, oh, the grid can't take more than 5% solar, and then it reached 5%. It's like, oh, well, it can't take 10%. Then it reached 10%. Oh, it can't take 15%, right? Like in the summer in Germany, which doesn't have any sun, right? Germany. Renewables were responsible on some days for 50% of the generation. 50%. Okay? I know the German grid is more advanced than, most developing countries, but where are we from 50? Right? We are at less than 0.1% now in developing countries. Let's get to 5, let's get to 10, we're not talking to 50, and then let's have a technical conversation if we can go more. So the utilities are at the stage of fighting it, and in my view, if the utilities do not get on board with this and find ways where they can make money out of people going solar, they are going to be redundant and they're going to be irrelevant within 10 to 15 years. They are going to be reduced to a grid operator, someone that just manages the grid and charges money maybe for transmission, because huge advantages for distributed generation. You don't have the transmission and distribution costs, you just have the generation cost. And you have a generation cost that is rapidly decreasing year on year. Okay, so they won't be able to compete with that cost. And then the good thing they have going for them now is that, well, the sun only shines a few hours a day, so your solar system could get you only a fraction of your savings, right? But when energy storage prices goes down, you'll be able to use that 24 hours, and then you won't be buying any electricity from the utility. Maybe you'll just pay them a symbolic fee every month to maintain a connection with them, so that if anything happens to your system just as an emergency, you have a backup and you can use the grid again. So if utilities don't realize that, and if they don't take this seriously, I think they're going to be irrelevant in a relatively short period of time. What if this didn't happen? We're obviously much better off that this happened than if it didn't, right? So there's credit to be given there that this happened, and the situation is better than before. However, even as the optimist, the law itself basically says 10%. We're doing 10%, and 90% we're still going to figure out, and we'll tell you about it when we figure it out. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about what this 90% is going to look like. And then when you compare it in the same legislation, there was one side of the book was renewables and one side of the book was natural gas. Natural gas, it was like almost 100%. We already know it, and here's what we're doing. And renewables like, okay, this is what we're doing, the 10% to the 90%, we're still going to get back to you on. That's in terms of the information. In terms of the quantitative side, obviously there are much bigger incentives for the natural gas and the oil side than for the renewables. So I think it was definitely much more shifting to fossil fuel than renewables. But again, as the optimist, I think, well, at least, I'm from a region where you couldn't have gotten anything, so, it's a good thing that at least they gave us this, in Mexico. But there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot more they can do. And again, this is, if you walk away from, remember one thing from this talk, remember this. They shouldn't do it just because if it's green or just because of environmentally friendly. Do it because this is fantastic economics. This will create a lot of jobs. This could be one of Mexico's largest industries, right? And to create one of the largest industries, if not the largest in the country, there needs to be strategy, there needs to be a plan, it takes time. There's nothing else that you can just press a button and create $1 trillion, another $1 trillion worth of value immediately. So they need to treat it with that patience, and they need to look at it with that patience. And we're not saying close down the oil and close down the gas. They can happen in parallel. It's just you need to diversify and you need to spread your risk, and you need to not miss out on amazing opportunities that you've been blessed with so many resources to help you capture them, like this one.
Well, I don't know if my name is Brenda. I don't know if I understood you correctly.
The whole lecture?
Yeah, that's okay. I'm a designer, so, and I just want to know, you said that perhaps companies shouldn't go for those customers that don't have like a credit history. But I guess in Mexico there are there's this huge BOP market. So, and maybe people don't even have like a credit history.
Sure.
So what do you think about that market and companies?
Sure. Well, I think in that case you will just need another entity to be involved. So the model I was saying was two entities. One is the consumer and one is the company providing the lease. So we have to all agree that you can't just put very valuable equipment that costs a lot of money on someone's roof without checking if this person is capable of honoring their agreements. I think we can all agree on that. The question is how we can do it. In the US, there's something called a credit check. It's very quick. We don't necessarily have to do the same thing. We have to just find the equivalent way that suits this country, that suits this market to verify. So for the BUP market segment that you mentioned, I guess then there should be a local banking entity involved that is comfortable taking that risk. So then the lease would be held by that bank. So it could be a microfinance organization, it could be a regional bank, could be a development bank, could be a local bank, some entity that is comfortable taking that risk. And then the other entity would be the one providing the engineering, the equipment, and the installation. So you'd have three entities to get over that problem. There's an extra charge for a second question.
I have a question. All these kind of projects are very risky, and the commercial bank sees all these kind of projects very, very risky. In Mexico, for example, we have a big problems with banks in these kind of investments. We, for example, we were a second-tier bank and we are a development bank, and to try to see this kind of investment more suitable for banks. What we do, we guarantee a lot of these investments. What are you doing, for example, in Egypt to sell these projects to the commercial banks and see them as less risky investments?
Sure. So I think I would have to say that the risky word is more coming from an more emotional than more from numbers. Because, okay, let's segment the risk. What does this project involve? It involves a technology called solar power. Okay, does this technology work? Yes, it's been working for 40 years. Is there a warranty? Yes, there's a warranty for 25 years. And what's the backing to it? Well, last year there's been $300 billion invested in this space. So we know the technology works on one side, okay? Is it going to save money or does it save money? Well, we know what the cost of the technology is, and we know what the cost of the electricity that is going to displace it. And we can make a calculation to see if it saves money or not. And it does save money. Nobody's going to try to do a project that is not going to save money from the first place. So if someone's trying to pitch to a bank and saying, I want a loan for a solar system, he's doing it because it's going to save them money, most likely. So that's the second thing. Now the third thing is the counterparty risk, which is when you give out the loan, is the person, what we were just discussing here, is he going to pay it back or no? And that's the only place where, depending on whether you do it correctly or not, there is a risk. And so if you just, everyone that comes in and asks for a loan, you sign the check and you give it to them, there is a big risk. But if we talk about, someone, for instance, who's providing the house as a guarantee, I mean, I'm being very extreme here, okay? Well, if he doesn't pay, you can just take over the house, right? And so what's the risk there? The risk is very little. I can say that the bank is doing other loans that are much more risky than this. So I think it's how you structure the loan that could make it risky or not. But like I said, there's so much money been put in this by commercial banks all over the world. They wouldn't be doing it if it was risky, and they wouldn't be lending at 6% and 8% if it was risky. So perhaps a specific entity came to you and asked for a loan with a certain structure that was risky. But generally, in around the world, the way it's done, there's so many ways to structure to take out that risk, and it basically, the missing component and the most important one is to make sure that the counterparty is bankable, that this entity can honor its payments for the profile of the lifetime of the project.
I don't know if you did. What about the certification on solar plants or wind energy?
What about
Certifications.
what about
There is regulations or something like that.
Sure.
For example.
Sure.
Reducing the risk. Yes.
Applications to reduce the risk.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, basically, as a company, any technology that we buy has to be certified from a specific entity that we trust. So there's two big labs. One's called UL, Underwriting Laboratories in the US, and one's called TUV in Germany. So these are the two biggest certification labs in the renewable energy industry, and they certify. I was just in Egypt in the summer in an inflatable boat, that thing, and it was certified by UL, for instance, and so they're just a certification entity that do all kinds of certifications, but they're the most famous for the renewable energy industry. So we as a company, we don't buy any equipment unless it was certified by those entities. And as a company, not just that, but we also request the detailed testing reports that was done by those entities in the lab to see what the maximum load that the inverter can handle, and what is the maximum conditions, highest temperatures that the module can handle. So yes, you have to be definitely very sophisticated and not just go by brand of, this sounds like a good brand, I'm going to buy it. You have to dig into the details and look into the test reports and make sure that the equipment that you're buying is very high quality equipment that can withstand harsh environments such as high temperatures, high humidity, high wind speeds. So we engineer our systems for category 4 hurricanes, for instance. So you really have to look into the components and make sure that they are all going to meet withstand those harsh criteria, because the chain is as strong as the weakest link. So if one tiny thing has a problem, the whole system is going to fail.
Pablo Hurtado from INAINE, and it was a very enlightening presentation. And I just have one question. From your personal point of view, is Mexico ready?
Well, if it was a race, yeah, it can go in and run, but it's not going to win with the situation it is. But it's not too far from catching up. Mexico will continue to have some solar installations, just like I've showed here. This year it's probably going to install 100 megawatts, more or less, maybe a little bit less, 160 to 167. But it's not going with the status quo by 2017 or by 2018. It's not going to be the biggest or one of the biggest markets in Latin America, not even the world. Yet it has the potential to be one of the biggest in the world. So we need for certain things to happen, and we need to push for certain things that we discussed for that to happen. Thank you.
One brief comment. We had this Monday a very big hurricane striking Baja California, And as for the record, in La Paz, there is the biggest photovoltaic plant in Latin America. 160,000 people living in La Paz get their electricity from photovoltaics. By today, as I'm talking with you, the only plant that is providing electricity now, as I'm speaking, is a photovoltaic installation in La Paz. And a question, you as a company, are you investing in Mexico?
Well, I'm not here on tourism, so we are certainly looking into it. It is, a market, once the right factors align, this can be an extremely attractive market. But we as a company, we have a culture of not waiting for a market to become front page news for us to enter it. We like to play a role in the development of the market and the realization of markets. So we're certainly very serious about Mexico, and we're looking to bring something new to the market, but it's still in the analysis and phase, so that when we decide to do it, it can be executed as planned with the blueprint and succeed.
Thank you.
So maybe I take the prerogative of being the host to ask a question. I'm just curious if you could, since we have, and for the benefit of many of the students who are here, maybe to talk about what is...
Yes, we are recruiting in Mexico.
Exactly. What are those areas where you see, you've been talking about not just solar as, projects, as a whole industry, a driver for growth, for economic growth, and you have made the business case for solar. So for students, for people who are entrepreneurs and want to seek opportunities, which are those areas that you see, they are ready for grabs in terms of innovation, of new businesses. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Sure, thanks.
Well, from an entrepreneurship point of view, I don't think there's something that is peeled like a banana and ready for you to go and eat it right away. Anything that you're going to do is going to be very hard work. You're going to do two types of hard work. One, general entrepreneurship hard work, which is hard whether you're selling cotton candy or you're doing a solar business, right? And two, hard work in the specific industry, because you're coming at a time where it's still in the early days and the market hasn't fully taken off yet. But I would say that something like I discussed on the solar leasing model, you don't necessarily have to develop the full company by yourself. You can aggregate clients, for instance. You can go to a compound that has 100 houses, 200 houses, make an agreement with them. If you get 5 or 6 of those compounds that are prepared to do something like that, or a number of supermarket chains or pharmacy chains or such, you can basically build a portfolio combine of these assets, and then you can go to a foreign company or to a local company, to a bank, and say, hey, look, I have this, I'm not going to do it by myself, but we need to get this type of partner on board and this type of partner on board. That is, I think, one opportunity for Mexico. Another opportunity would be energy efficiency. So because you have a lot of people being sold electricity at very cheap prices, they don't really care how much electricity they consume, because they're not paying for it. Who's paying for it? All of you are. From the tax money is being taken and is being paid for that. So again, you can, whether it's on the municipality level or the government level, for an energy efficiency, you can just show the government how much money they can save, and they will be buying, whether it's LED bulbs or inverter air conditioners or so many just energy efficiency technologies that is catered for the residential or for the refrigeration commercial market or for the manufacturing. Or you can go directly to the people who are paying high electricity prices, the commercial and the residential, and say, hey, if you put this light bulb here, you drop your lighting bill by 80%. So there's, I think, energy efficiency, solar leasing, there's big entrepreneurial opportunities there, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. But again, nothing easy was ever worth having, right? So on the more corporate side, non-entrepreneurial, non-risky side, I think There are a large number of solar and wind companies in Mexico today, so there are very interesting engineering work to be done for you to go and work with these companies and learn how do you design those systems, you know, the performance, the different equipment, who are the biggest suppliers. Just a lot of good, interesting training that you get, very low risk kind of job, but you learn a lot that could then help you position to a year or 2 or 3 later, go and start this other company. So yeah, so that's it. These are the things that come to my mind.
Thank you very much. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario? Sí, por favor.
Hi, my name is Leticia. I come from Banobras, which is a Mexican development bank for infrastructure. And my question is if this model has been applied or implemented in any Latin American countries.
Latin American countries, it has certainly not been applied with the scale of magnitude that it has been applied in other parts of the world. So that's for sure. But, you know, there's always, you know, that little company that just started that you're not aware of. So when it comes to large scale, you know, large projects, where, you know, it certainly hasn't been done. So, yeah, I put my answer that way.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
If you decide to come into this business, where would you look for the best technology and the best technicians?
How?
Where?
But we already have it. I mean, we were in this business for a long time, and if you would like me to answer where it is, it depends. Obviously, if you're talking about solar, today 85% of the panels are being manufactured in Asia. Okay, the inverters, the best inverters, are still in Europe today. These are the two major components of a solar system. For wind, you have American and European companies dominate the space, but the Chinese have also have had a significant market share.
When you say Asia, is China?
Sorry?
When you mention Asia,
sure.
is China?
Well, 65% is in China, and another 20% is in other Asian countries.
And when you say Europe?
When I say Europe, I mean, well, you have Power One, ABB. So ABB is a Swiss company. You have SMA, which is a German company. And then for the wind, you have Siemens, you have Enercon, you have Gamesa.
To be here with us today, and we are hoping that this is not, you know, the only one occasion that we see you at the Global Institute for Sustainability of Egade Business School very often. And of course, I will ask you all that we thank him with a round of applause. We wish you well for your projects in Mexico, so that allows you to come here more often. Okay, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Y gracias a todos ustedes por su participación. Les estaremos avisando de las reuniones que estaremos organizando en este tema de energías renovables, y también, pues, para los interesados vamos a tener pronto a retomar las discusiones sobre cambio climático. Para algunos que están por aquí que participaron en el primer semestre, pues vamos a tener una revisión del plan especial de cambio climático, y bueno, ver qué tanto se retomaron las recomendaciones que hicimos en el grupo de cambio climático, pues ya fue en abril. Así que pues estaremos informándoles, y muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Gracias.